So this sort of all started when I was operating with a friend of mine in Georgia, as a matter of fact. And I complained to him that I was really tired of delivering covered hoppers to 2 oatmeal boxes. And I'd been doing that for about 5 years, 6 years. And I said, and he looked at me and said, well, do something about it. So I built him the elevators. I think it was all a con. But at any rate, I decided that what I needed to do was to sort of talk about what I'd like to see in a layout. So the question then is, okay, what's happening here? There we go. So the question is, how much detail do you add? Where? How far do you go? And all that kinds of stuff. These are pictures of my old layout down in Florida. And I decided that what I'm talking to you about probably may not even matter to any of you. And so I have to make this sort of a preview here by telling you one thing. Well, this is the wrong direction. Let's try this way. Okay, this is a hobby. So your hobby is just the same as my hobby in a whole lot of respects, but in a lot of places they don't overlap at all. So this means that ultimately the only person you have to satisfy is yourself. So that being said, always obey rule number 1, which is my layout, my rules. If I go over to your layout, it's your layout, it's your rules. So these are the rules that I apply to my layout. Maybe something in there can help you out too. And this is an old thing done by Frank Ellison back in the 1940s, talking about his delta line. It consists of condensing everything down within reasonable proportions, right? This is like a drama. All of the things that we're worried about in most cases is operating the trains. We want to see it go through a countryside that we recognize. That's the play, that's the props and things like that. So I'm talking mostly about building the props, not the railroad itself. Why is it important? Well, track is weathered, rolling stock is detailed and weathered, insert are detailed and weathered. So structures and backgrounds sometimes look like it's a miniature golf course sometimes. And you think, or ghost town, there's no occupants in the layout. And not all visitors are model railroaders. I've discovered that probably about 80% of my visitors are not model railroaders. They couldn't care less about the engines. They couldn't care less about the rolling stock or the track. They want to see something that tells them that it's recognizable as some part of the country. So this is, quote, super detailing, if you will. That's adding all the bits and pieces that make the structures appear real. Along with the junk that gets left around, because any structure has lots of junk left around it. So my first steps, even before I build a structure, for example, is to consult photos of similar structures, write a list of all the details to add on in about what I consider 10 important areas. I mount all of my structures on a sheet of plastic, usually about 60 thousandths or 40 thousandths plastic, or a piece of gator foam, so that I can build the diorama and I can put the scenery right up to the base. And then I can plop it down onto my layout and blend it in. So then I begin. One of the things that I discovered when I first started riding trains back in the 1955, 56, something like that, riding the Santa Fe, riding the New York Central, the Pennsy, and things like that, you never go by the front of buildings on the train. You always go by the backsides. So maybe what we ought to be doing is, at least some of the time, looking at the backsides of buildings. So I have about 400 pictures of the backsides of buildings. All of the wooden stuff, all of the conduit, everything that gets weathered and blocked and everything else. That's the backside of the building. That's what you're going to see from the train. Even the alleyways, for example. Now, this isn't going to help because it doesn't let me do any of this, but actually, there's a whole bunch of old mattresses sitting in an alley. There's old rollaways and stuff like that. How many of you have TV antennas or satellite antennas on your layout if you're doing modern railroading and things like that. So all these old wooden fences and things like that, they're never painted, they're all weathered and everything else. Those are all on the back sides. So 4 important considerations I consider on a structure is the foundation, electrical. The only reason I put electrical in there is the first structure I ever entered into a layout contest. The judge wrote only one comment: how does it get electricity? I didn't have a meter on there or any kind of conduit or anything to get the wire to the building or anything else. So that was important. I think I lost 5 points for not telling you how to get it to the building. Let's see, what else? Plumbing. If the building's built before about 1950, the plumbing goes on the outside, not on the inside. Weathering. If it's before 1950, it gets really weathered. A few more important considerations. Rooftops. We tend to ignore rooftops entirely, but there's all kinds of junk on rooftops. Interiors. Do you want to light an interior or not? I'll show you at least one trick so you don't have to light the interior. Clutter all over. People just aren't clean. They just drop stuff where they are. And finally, figures and vehicles, which really tell a lot of the story. And that's one of the things I think that some people tend to not take careful consideration of. So, signs. Buildings have lots of signs on them, but be careful with that. There's no Moxie in Colorado if you're modeling Colorado. There's no Moxie outside of about 4 states if you're modeling other than those states. And then some locality identifiers, things that identify this as being, well, I model northern New Mexico, so I know exactly what I need to model northern New Mexico. None of it's around here. So, the foundation. Don't plunk your buildings down on the top of your scenery. That foundation has to grow into the ground. Simple. Bricks, stone, timber, all of those things have to go into the ground. Let's see. So here's a structure that was on my old layout. I built it again on this sheet of plastic and then molded it or blended it into the layout. That is cardstock, by the way. It's not plastic or anything else. Electrical, like I said, unless you model the 19th century, most of the, if not all the buildings have electricity. There's got to be meter box. There's got to be exterior lights sometimes, particularly if it's an industrial building. Interior lights, maybe. Illuminated signs, maybe. Power poles and telegraph lines, at least into the 70s before you get buried wires and buried power lines, or a pole with a lamp or a street light. Those things tell a story about the era. So, for example, here's a structure, just putting in a light switch and a piece of wire going up there. That's how they light that light, from the outside, not from the inside. That's a real simple detail. It doesn't take long to build something like that. Power lines going up the hill, things like that. Just to indicate that they actually do have electricity inside of the illuminated buildings. Let's see. Plumbing. Outside pipes with taps and drains, and things like gutters and drain pipes. You don't see a lot of buildings with gutters and drain pipes on a lot of layouts. A tap on a sidewall, a water meter, a waste vent pipe, standpipes on tops of buildings where the bathroom might be. It's going to be real difficult to flush without a standpipe. So things that need to be weathered, for example. You can weather all kinds of different things on a roof. You can weather dirt, things like that running off the corners of buildings. This is all done with pan pastels, for example. First things first, if it's shiny, dull coat it. Now, I don't buy dull coat anymore. The old formula was really great. The new formula is not so hot. I just use something from what I can get at Walmart or something like that. That's a dull finish, and spray that instead. Broken or warped boards, nail holes. Use a pounce wheel. If you haven't ever put nail holes into a building, go to the local, oh, I don't know, Joann's Fabrics or something like that. Get a set of pounce wheels. It costs you about $10, but they're little wheels with points in them, and ask your spouse how to use them. You just run it along the board and it'll give you nice nail holes. Before you dye it, before you paint it or anything else like that, peeling and faded paint, aged building materials. Sometimes the ends break off and you got to have them weathered, things like that. One thing that's sort of a thing with me is some taboo colors, mostly white and black. There aren't very many things in the world that are absolutely white or black. They get weathered real quickly. And so, for example, I tend to never to use black. I use a color called charcoal. It's really, really close to black, but it's got a little bit of gray in it. And that saves me a weathering step, that's all. I do paint coal black, for example, if I've got artificial coal, because then I can lighten it and sparkle it and everything else. But if you look at this, use ivory or any other variations on white instead of white itself. It saves you some weathering time. Rose or burgundy instead of red. Ochre versus yellow. So not those pure colors. The pure colors tend not to exist in nature. Washes. Lots of good washes, not just black, but browns and grays and rust. All of those things are great. And they really give you a feeling for how old the building is. And then self-adhesive powders are better than the dry pastel chalks. I love pan pastels. They're great. The really nice thing about pan pastels is unless you're handling it all the time, you really don't even have to seal it. I've had buildings that are 20, 30 years old. I've never done anything with, just put pan pastels on and they stick so well that you don't need to seal them. The dry pastel chalks, the minute you seal them, they disappear. Pan pastels don't. So either way, that's great. Okay, so this is all done with pan pastels on these buildings and things like that. Just draw them right down the side. There are now weathering pencils too. Weathering pencils are great. If you can find them, a set of weathering pencils is pretty expensive, but you dip the tip into the water and then you can just draw really fine lines and all kinds of things like that. But these are done with plain old pan pastels and as thin a sponge as I can get. For example, let me see here. Go the right direction and it might work. Oh, okay. So again, even the roofs need to be weathered. I've got a really neat technique for weathering these things. I spray it with a primer that is self-etching. You can buy self-etching primer at Lowe's or Home Depot or something like that. It's a self-etching gray primer. You let it dry and you don't have to bake it in the oven or anything else. You can just put pan pastels on it and it holds great. So roofs, rooftop accesses, tar paper, sandpaper, tar seams, clutter, all of that on roofs. Have you ever been on the roof of any kind of a building after it's been up for, oh, say 20, 30 minutes? There's all kinds of stuff that's been left behind up on the top of the roof. They're not very clean ever. Vents, chimneys, standpipes. If it's an old rooftop water tower, if it's a new an air conditioning system, all kinds of venting and good stuff like that. So backs of buildings, not the fronts of buildings. All the stuff that goes in the backside of buildings. Let's see, can I get this? No, that's not going to work. Oh, good. Well, went all the way to the back to the. Oh, come on. Well, we'll just go on through this. Hey, look, it works now. How did it do that?
It's not. What he's doing right now is not coming through. We're still on the slide 28.
Oh, there's slide 28.
Yep.
Okay, I don't know if it'll go forward again now, but we'll see. But there's all kinds of stuff, an old pallet there, an old cardboard box, trash cans, stuff sticking out. That's the backside of the building. Even in northern New Mexico with all these old adobe buildings, you see the backsides of the buildings more often than you see the front side. Okay, interiors. A lot of people like interiors. I like to build interiors. It's always great fun and relaxing and things like that. Other people don't. It can be really time consuming. It can be really expensive with all those little detail parts you got to buy and paint and everything else. I like to do that just to relax on a cold winter's night, but they have to be lighted. So you got to learn how to work with LEDs and things like that to light them. Curtains and shades on the windows, they're never symmetrical. So don't make them symmetrical on your building. But you can have false interiors too, just a photo that you arch around. I've seen some really brilliant pictures of this. For some reason, people who model the Denver and Rio Grande always have got to have Skillen's interior or Skillen's General Store. I'll bet you 90% of them have a photograph of Skillen's General Store inside rather than detailing it. So that's one way to do it. But see, that looks great. The interior is lighted, great, looks great, but it's expensive. Lots of interiors fascinate me and things like that, but this does point out one thing that's interesting is the figures themselves. If you don't want to go through all that bother, here's another way to do it. See, there's a guy standing inside right by the door. It's just an old figure that I painted sort of a neutral gray and put it there. So he's in the shadows, but you know it's occupied. You know the building's occupied. There's a guy's head right there and everything else. You can do that at a window. Somebody's standing looking out the window. All you have is painted a little bit of light gray, and you can't pick out the detail, but you can see that somebody's in there. And that's a way to fake an interior real quickly. Okay, so clutter. Even if there's a trash can, everybody manages to miss the trash can. Boxes, boards, bottles, cans, all kinds of stuff that needs to be around the base of those buildings. So there's a trash can. You almost hit it a couple of times. And stuff along the sides of the buildings. All that clutter tells you a story about that building. Same things with loading docks and things like that. All kinds of clutter. You don't believe there's clutter in real life? That's the Durango yard. And there are flat cars just loaded with stuff. The wheels are gone, the trucks are gone, it's just sitting out on the side. Lots of clutter. So now you got to put it onto my layout too. Lots and lots of clutter. And actually that's too clean for that clutter. It's still got to have some more clutter added. Okay, so signs, like I said, there's no Moxie in Colorado. So don't put Moxie signs up. It seems to me every time you get a sheet full of signs, it's always got to have Ted Williams and Moxie. As if the entire world knows what Moxie is and who Ted Williams was. Anyway, so the signs indicate an era and a region. I put these two on here because bear service is all over the southwestern US. I don't know if it is around here or not.
Used to be.
And this guy probably nobody knows unless you live in New Mexico. That's Mr. Spudnut. Those were potato donuts. And they drove around a little truck and you could buy Spudnuts. Okay. Oklahoma, Missouri, and Arkansas. Good old Broken Arrow coal. Baths, 25 cents, but you can't get a bath for 25 cents anymore. Era specific, for example. Genesee, better be upstate New York, because that's about the only place you're going to get Jenny. Okay. Regionally specific. I'm on New Mexico. Chili's, chili ristras. And so you got to have chili ristras on a lot of buildings to have that regionally specific clue as to what there is. So here's chili ristras and things like that on some of my buildings. I make them out of basmati rice and paint them. That's all that is. But I can make lots and lots of them. Okay. And then you have got all kinds of keep stuff. All kinds of scribs and scraps, for example. Aluminum foil, I use it to make curtains. I use it to make laundry hanging on the line, use it for rags hanging out of the pocket of some guy working on a car, things like that. Tissue paper makes great newspapers, makes great scrap paper, plastic straws, all kinds of pipes and stacks and things like that on building. The pink and orange margins of one copy of the Financial Times. You don't have to become a Financial Times fanatic. Buy one copy, because all the margins are a nice pinkish orange color. They make great shipping stickers, and you can, one page will give you about 5 million of them. I still wonder about dryer lint, but I've got a little box of dryer lint, and I discovered on the structure I'm building right now what it makes great: hair on the floor of a barber shop. So I keep it. Not too many barber shops, but
Question, you have some of the earlier shots that were cardboard boxes. They look very realistic. Those made of just.
It's made of paper, brown craft paper. Yep. Okay. Now, we don't have to be this fancy for model railroads, but we can give the impression that we're that fancy. This thing took, by the way, you talked about 80 hours. This takes about 100 hours to paint. It's a lot of painting, and I don't ever want to do that again. This scale, it's 1/24. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about things. One of the things that I like to do when I travel is to get model railroading magazines from wherever country I'm in. This one's from France. And inside was this picture of this nice railroad going down this street and everything else. And I looked at that and I thought, gee, that's a really great picture, except for one thing. This lady is shiny. There aren't very many shiny people. There are a few, but there are not very many shiny people unless they're sitting on the beach with all that oil on them and things like that. So the first thing you got to do is to, oh, good. Well, that's not going to help. All the good stuff is in the back, so you won't be able to see that. But the point here is that you need to have structures, and maybe I can go through it a little bit more. People, for example, who aren't all in action poses. We aren't in action poses very much. I haven't seen an action pose here today. We're all sitting on chairs. So, and you got to have the right pictures. I mean, King Arthur was never in New Mexico, but Pancho Villa was. So there's Pancho Villa on my layout. Okay, let's do it this way. Okay, an appropriate mix of ethnicities and gender appropriate to the era. This is in one of the towns on my layout, Native American guy and a cowboy. I painted those probably in an hour. So it doesn't take long to paint them. I like to paint the figures rather than buy the pre-painted ones. We'll talk about why later. But minimize the action poses. I had this on my layout for a while. They were filming a gunfight. Here's Clint Eastwood type shooting at this guy. The guy's just been hit. He's about to fall. After about 3 years, I really wanted that guy to fall. He's just sitting there. This guy's on a horse. It's just coming to a halt. He's still coming to a halt. Action poses are interesting. They're funny. They're fun. But boy, after a while, they just get really boring because nothing's happening. So you got to minimize those action figures. Most people are standing around. So I have lots of people standing around and talking to each other and passing the time of day and things like that. Even this little tiny store, guy's just standing there with some stuff. He's not really throwing things around or doing anything like that. Sitting around waiting to do, this is on the backside of a brewery. So the guy's got a complimentary beer and a newspaper, and he's just sitting there waiting to do whatever. This isn't going to help very much, but a lot of people who model steam, and I model a steam era, don't have engineers and firemen in their open cabs. I also like to pun on people. This is actually a reasonably close rendition of J. Robert Oppenheimer as a fireman. My layout's around Los Alamos, New Mexico, where I grew up. And so I had to put Oppenheimer there somewhere. So I made him a fireman, waving to the crowd, of course. Don't overpopulate the scene. If you've got a flag stop, don't put 10 people there. Flag stops are there because people don't hardly ever use them anyway. So one guy standing there waiting for the train to come, that's enough. Painting figures. I'd say painting figures is necessary for S scale or larger so that you can give them some detail. HO and smaller, well, if nothing else, do three things. Spray them with dull coat. Then give them a raw sienna wash on the face and hands and a black charcoal or dark brown wash on the rest of the body. It gives them a little bit of texture. That may lead to another problem, but in general, that's exactly what I did with this HO figure. And that took 20 minutes. And all I did was put a wash on what was already painted. And this is just a wash of black or charcoal or something like that. It just gives them a little bit of dimensionality. Start off with the structures, or start off with figures. I like figures that are well textured, well sculpted to begin with. And then you could go through the same process. Whoa, that was quick. At any rate, here's the final one. And it takes a while to do those things, but it's worth doing. It gives you an idea that these people are actually sort of living there. Some commercial painted figures you discover I thought maybe I could just spray paint them and paint them again myself. I really hate these figures. This is my own bias, Woodland Scenics figures. You look at them this way, they got problems with the eyes. They've all got thyroid disease of some sort. The other problem is if you spray them, all the detail goes away. The buttons and everything else are all hand painted on. They're not there in the original figures. So I gave up on a lot of those and relegated them to the backdrop, like hiding behind a bush. Okay, so you got lots and lots of figures. This is the kind of thing that you want to see. Now, I have another one on here just to sort of amuse everybody. German Model Railroading Magazine. And the German Model Railroading Magazine had the title, "The Most Common Details That You Need for an American Layout." If you're going to model American, you're German, and these are the things you've got to have on your layout. A Greyhound bus, a Harley Davidson, a Corvette, of course, the pickup truck, and American fast food, especially, and it said this, especially Taco Bell, KFC, and Burger King. They forgot McDonald's entirely. Yellow cabs, diners and motels, the glitzier the better. You know, the old motels that were like teepees, things like that. Got to have a tourist trap like the Snake, Snake Ranch or Rock City or the world's largest gopher and things like that. And movie theaters with big chase lights and marquees. I just thought that was kind of interesting to see what the rest of the world. I know.
Quite a bit like miniature world.
I don't know what the date on this was, but it was within the last 10 years. Well, okay. You ever seen a German layout? Okay, some vehicles. Now that we've seen that, correct area. The correct era. There are no Volkswagens in the 1920s. So if you're modeling before about 1942, no Volkswagens. Have a correct mix. Before the 1960s, most US cars were not manufactured anywhere but in the US. Before about 1985, paint oxidized rapidly. When I was a kid, my job every Saturday was to polish my dad's car, because by the end of the week, it had all oxidized again and I had to paint it, or I had to put the wax on. Turtle wax, of course, had to use turtle wax, not Simonized, turtle wax, and buff the entire 62 Chevy. So dull them down real quickly. and at least make them semi-gloss. But there aren't a lot of shiny vehicles around, if you look, until past the 80s when they sort of started putting that nice plastic coating on them and things like that. Vehicles weather rapidly too. The tires, the bumpers, and the fenders really weather. So put a little bit of rust on them or dust and things like that. Okay, well, I didn't mean to show all of these at the same time, and some of these aren't going to come out too good, but this is actually 1947. After World War II, a lot of vehicles didn't get replaced. And so if you're modeling the late 40s into the early 50s, you're going to have a lot of cars from the 30s and 40s on your layout. This one doesn't help too much because, again, there were 4 individual photographs here. But this here, these are all from 1941, Santa Fe, New Mexico. This is a coal yard, and it's all being delivered in 1941 by cart, by horse cart. This is the local laundromat or laundry service, 1941. That's an old vehicle that they're using. Yep. Okay, so what's missing on most vehicles on a layout? First of all, license plates. They're all driving illegally. Drivers and moving cars, especially convertibles. Nothing more terrifying than seeing an empty convertible going down the road. Windshield wiper effects, I'll tell you how to do that. Add some variety, open doors and turned wheels. They're relatively easy to do. Loads in trucks, not empty trucks. Put some loads in them. Okay. This is more dramatic when you do it with lots and lots of slides, but if you go to www.worldlicenseplates.com, you can get license plates from all over the world, and they come in this stream of 1950 to 1958 or 59, for example. And you can just take that picture and scale it down to whatever scale you need to do, and you can put them all. And if you're really good with, you know, some kind of Photoshop thing, you can even change the numbers. But mine have a whole lot of the same license plate myself. But at least they've got license plates on there. Nobody reads them, but they see the license plate, and it's every state. And since I have New Mexico, I've got a lot of government plates on there too. For every Indian reservation has their own plates, and a couple of laboratories have all their own government plates and things like that. They are all on that site. So it's a neat thing to do if you're interested in going to that level of detail. So, windshield wipers effects. How'd you get that? It's real easy. Take a piece of Scotch tape, make it into an arc about the width of that windshield wiper, put it on the window, spray the rest with dull coat. Peel the piece of Scotch tape off, and you've got windshield wipers. Real dusty environment, why not? License plate too. Okay. Not exactly sure why I had this other than there to show that this guy's standing there trying to figure out what's wrong with his old car, his old Model T. That's a 1942 Model T ambulance. So lots and lots of things to consider. Again, things that are sort of hidden behind this, but a lot of military vehicles wind up being used in civilian life. So you can get a model of an old 2.5 ton Chevy or 2.5 ton Ford truck, paying them, you know, just make them work, put them to work. Here's that guy trying to figure out what to do with his old Model T. But take a look, for example, at some other military models. If you're lucky like me in O scale, there are Volkswagens. German Volkswagens used as staff cars. Big deal, paint them to different color. They're still a Volkswagen. And there's Renault cars and there's Ford cars. One of the ones that I should be back in there for you to see are a whole bunch of automobiles made by GAZ, G-A-Z. That was a Soviet manufacturer. They were all licensed by either Chevy or Ford to the Soviet Union before World War II. And so they are Ford 1936 through about 1938 Fords that were copied by the Russians. And they were all of their 2.5-ton trucks. They were their ambulances. They were fire trucks, all licensed by Ford to the Soviet Union. Just paint them different. Make them do different things besides carrying weapons. And they're great. So those are other things to do. Here's another one. Again, there's that Volkswagen. There's a staff car, Army staff car. It's a 42 Ford. You couldn't buy a 42 Ford during 1942 because it was all going to the military, but it's a 1942 Ford. This one I like particularly. This is a Japanese military motorcycle with a sidecar, but you can take the sidecar off, obviously. Anybody know what that is? That's a Harley. Harley licensed motorcycles to the Japanese in the 1930s. So it's a Harley. You can have Harleys on US layouts. Okay. One of the other things that I came across, which was kind of funny, I think I bought this for a nickel at a bargain table made by a company called Bandai. And Bandai makes military kinds of models, but the thing that really got me was this word bicycle. And you open up this packet and there were like 10 bicycles in there, about 6 or 7 parts. They're the best O-scale bicycle in the world. They're great. The rest of the rafts and stuff like that, I think I disposed of ultimately. So I'll leave it there. And that's my particular take on model railroads. And when I go to see a layout, those are the kinds of things that I enjoy seeing. On the other hand, for 7 years, I did deliver covered hoppers to 2 oatmeal boxes, and I was perfectly happy doing that too, even though I gave the guy a hard time. So it's your layout, your rules. Okay. Oh, needed a brakeman, Albert Einstein.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.